Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Hermione Granger began her time at Hogwarts as an unpopular but incredibly intelligent know-it-all. Over the years, she transformed into a confident young woman, still driven by her love of learning and her deep sense of justice. But even the most iconic heroines can fall victim to flawed storytelling. Today we'll explore the storylines where Hermione's character development felt weak, inconsistent, or simply poorly handled. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. One of the most controversial moments in Hermione's arc was her campaign for house elf rights. Yes, the magical world treats house elves unfairly, but Hermione's response causes more confusion than sympathy. Normally, Hermione operates with logic: research first, analysis second, action last. But in this case, she suddenly decides she knows what's best for the elves, without reading up on liberation practices, without consulting the elves themselves. She simply forms an organization and starts pushing her views onto others. Her activism ends up annoying everyone around her, and the storyline disappears as abruptly as it began. It doesn't feel like Hermione, and it certainly doesn't feel like a strong narrative arc. Number 2. The teeth. Many forget that Hermione didn't always look like Emma Watson. In the books, her front teeth were notably large. Her dentist parents opposed magical intervention, and Hermione respected that until a curse accidentally exaggerated her dental problem. She then seizes the opportunity and asks Madame Pomfrey to shrink her teeth to a reasonable length, and that's it. The topic never comes up again. This episode was so inconsequential that it's no surprise it was cut from the films. It added nothing to her character development, no drama, no conflict, no growth, just a cosmetic fix, and that's all. Number 3. The Prefect Badge. When Hermione is appointed a prefect in Book 5, it feels entirely predictable. Smart, disciplined, rule-abiding. Who else would get the badge? But let's be honest, Hermione broke the rules constantly. From starting Dumbledore's army to brewing Polyjuice Potion in her first year, her resume is far from squeaky clean. And then there's Ron, who also becomes a prefect despite his general lack of discipline. And this raises the question, do prefect badges even mean anything, or are they just plot devices? It might have been more interesting if Hermione hadn't received the badge. That could have taught her a valuable lesson. Life isn't just about grades, but instead, Rowling chose the easiest route, gave her the title, and never developed the arc further. Number 4. The Ron Lavender Hermione Triangle. One of the strangest and most poorly written subplots is Hermione's sudden jealousy when Ron starts dating Lavender. Previously, she had shown mature romantic interest in Victor Crumb. Their relationship was calm and respectful. And now she's suddenly portrayed as an emotionally unstable teenager who attacks Ron with a flock of magical birds. Yes, Hermione is no stranger to strong emotions, but this behavior felt pulled from a teen drama, not from a story about growth and emotional intelligence. Wasn't the shift too abrupt, too cliché? This could have been a chance to show Hermione handling her emotions with nuance. Instead, we got a scene that felt more in line with Lavender's character than Hermione's. Number 5. The decision to marry Ron. And finally, the epilogue. 19 years later, Hermione and Ron are married with children. On paper, it's a happy ending. But does it actually feel believable? Throughout the 7 books, their relationship is marked by constant arguing, sarcastic jabs, and mutual misunderstanding. Even loyal fans have asked, could this couple realistically survive even a year together? The actors themselves questioned the plausibility of this pairing, and later J.K. Rowling admitted that perhaps she made a mistake in bringing them together. Hermione deserved someone who shared her values, respected her intellect, and treated her with kindness. Ron is a wonderful character, but as a couple, they seemed more like they were irritating each other than lifting each other up. Number 6. Hermione's unconvincing jealousy toward Lavender Brown. She watched through the frosted window as Lavender kissed Ron with theatrical passion. Her breath hitched, her eyes welled. Then she turned and fled, not to a library, not to a duel, but to a bathroom where she cried, alone. In the Half-Blood Prince film, Hermione's jealousy is loud, shallow, and painfully one-note. "Excuse me, I have to go and vomit," she says, bitterness coating every word. The girl who faced down trolls and Death Eaters now breaks over a hallway romance, not with anger, not with dignity, but with sobbing and silence. It's not just painful, it's out of character. In the book, her pain is there, but it runs deeper. It simmers. "You've got the emotional range of a teaspoon," she snaps at Ron, trying to hold herself together. The line is sharp, layered, part joke, part wound. But in the movie she's reduced to a cliché. The cleverest witch of her age becomes a heartbroken girl pining after a boy who barely notices her. There's no growth, no confrontation, no self-respect in how the story treats her emotions. Just jealousy, tears, and a broken girl in the girls' lavatory. Hermione Granger deserved better than this. Number 7. Awkward attempt at house elf activism. Hermione burst into the Gryffindor common room with fire in her eyes and a stack of parchment under her arm. "I've started SPEW," she announced, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. She passed out badges, drafted manifestos, and demanded signatures, but no one took her seriously. Ron laughed. Even Harry avoided the topic. What could have been a powerful story about slavery, injustice, and magical class systems turned into a running joke. You do realize that your sheets are changed, your fires lit, your classrooms cleaned, and your food cooked by a group of magical creatures who are unpaid and enslaved? She cried. But the conversation stopped there. She never asked the elves what they wanted. When Dobby embraced freedom, he was seen as odd, even by other elves. Winky cried at the thought of being dismissed. Creature snarled at the very idea. Yet Hermione pushed forward, certain she knew better. That wasn't compassion. That was control. The girl who always listened, always questioned, suddenly silenced those she claimed to defend. The narrative didn't explore the moral complexity. It mocked it. Her activism became background noise. Her kindness was twisted into stubbornness. And the elves? They remained in the shadows, unheard. Number 8. Hermione's strange attitude toward studying in 6th year. In the Half-Blood Prince, something changed. Hermione, the girl who lived for textbooks and rules, suddenly became cold and dismissive when Harry outperformed her in potions, not because he studied harder, but because he found a second-hand book with notes scribbled by the mysterious Half-Blood Prince. "You shouldn't be using it," she snapped. "It's cheating." But this time, her argument didn't hold. The book was brilliant, full of tips, improvements, real mastery, the kind of thing Hermione usually admired. But instead of curiosity, she showed irritation. It wasn't about ethics. It was about pride. She didn't even try to understand the annotations, didn't analyze the spells or test their logic. She just turned her back. That wasn't the Hermione readers knew. The girl who once solved Snape's potion riddle in 1st year now refused to even open a superior resource. It felt off, shallow, out of character. Her brilliance had always come with humility and love for knowledge, but now, when someone else had an edge, she shut down. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't hers. Number 9. Endless arguments about prophecies. When Harry discovers the prophecy in the Order of the Phoenix, everything changes. He's shaken, quiet, alone. But instead of offering comfort, Hermione dives into logic. Divination is a very woolly discipline, she insists, brushing off any belief that the prophecy could mean something real. Ron stays quiet. Hermione debates. Page after page, she challenges Harry's fears not with empathy, but with theory. It turns their conversations into cold arguments. Not support, not strategy, just noise. The trio is splintered, and she doesn't seem to see it. It happens again in The Half-Blood Prince, When Harry grows suspicious of Draco Malfoy, Hermione rejects him outright. "You've got a fixation, Harry," she says, without ever really listening. Even when Harry presents clues, she clings to her own ideas. It's frustrating because Hermione is supposed to be the one who sees through the noise. But here, she becomes a roadblock. The girl who once solved the Sorcerer's Stone puzzle now refuses to follow a trail. Her brilliance turns into arrogance. Her skepticism becomes a flaw. And in the moments Harry needs her most, she's too busy being right. Number 10, clumsy transformation at the Yule Ball. She walked down the marble staircase like a dream. Pale periwinkle dress. Hair no longer frizzy, but smooth and swept up. For one fleeting night at the Yule Ball, Hermione Granger wasn't the girl with her hand in the air. She was the girl everyone turned to look at. Ron Weasley stared in shock. He had never seen her look so pretty, the book reads, and just like that, the message was clear. Beauty equals validation. The brainy girl was now worth noticing because she looked the part. But it felt cheap. This wasn't earned character development. It was a makeover moment stolen from a teen rom-com. A girl who had faced trolls, solved mysteries, and stood by her friends when no one else did, suddenly gained value only when she changed her hair. As if all those years of courage and brilliance were invisible under curls, the transformation scene wanted to be empowering, but it leaned too hard on the cliché, ugly, duckling becomes swan, now the boys care. It didn't elevate her, it reduced her to a reveal. The film doubled down on it. The camera lingers on her walking into the ballroom, gasps fill the hall, and Ron looks wounded. But nothing deeper follows, no real dialogue, no moment where Hermione owns her identity or challenges how people see her. Victor Krum is her date, yes, but even that is used mostly to provoke jealousy. The real Hermione, sharp, confident, emotional, disappears behind the dress, and when the night ends, she goes right back to being the girl no one looks at. The message is unkind. The transformation wasn't about her. It was about everyone else learning to see what was already there. Number 11, lack of development in her relationship with her parents. She stood in the living room, wand in hand, tears in her eyes, whispering a spell that would erase her from her parents' memories forever. She had erased herself from her parents' minds, so that they would think they were Wendell and Monica Wilkins, and that their life's ambition was to move to Australia, the book says. It was one of the most heartbreaking sacrifices in the entire series. Hermione didn't just leave home, she deleted herself from the lives of the only people who had loved her before Hogwarts, and yet we never saw them again. There was no reunion, no letter, no conversation, no scene where Hermione hesitated or questioned the cost of what she'd done. Even in Deathly Hallows, as the trio sits intense and waits in silence, we never hear her speak of her parents. Not once does she say their names, not once does she dream about them. A girl who once cried over bad grades simply buries the trauma of erasing her family as if it never happened. It's as if the writers themselves forgot the weight of that moment. Rowling gave us a chance to see the raw cost of war, and passed it by. What would it have meant to show Hermione finding her parents in Australia? To see them look at her with no memory? Or worse, to feel that something was missing, but not know what? The silence is louder than any scene. It leaves a hole in her arc. We saw the Weasleys, Lupin, even Dobby receive emotional farewells. But Hermione's own family, what but the people she erased, are never allowed back into her story. She fought Voldemort, saved her friends, survived torture, but we never saw her grieve the loss of home. That silence was not strength, it was omission. Hermione deserved more, her parents deserved more. In a story filled with found families, the one she came from was left behind, quietly, permanently, like a memory that was never supposed to return. Number 12, Hermione as a comic relief tool through over-seriousness. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, When Hermione says we could have been killed, or worse, expelled, the moment is meant to be funny. And it is, at first. But by the third or fourth film, Hermione's obsession with rules and safety had turned from charming quirk to a repetitive gag. Her role became predictable. Whenever Harry and Ron did something reckless, Hermione would respond with an exaggerated eye roll or a stern lecture. Instead of letting her grow, the writers boxed her into the role of the nagging voice of reason. The same Hermione who punched Draco Malfoy in the face, prisoner of Azkaban, was now reduced to a walking warning sign. In the Goblet of Fire, during the scene where Ron refuses to believe Harry didn't put his name in the goblet, Hermione is caught in the middle. It's a tense moment, yet the film reduces her to a line like, "Ron, you are so stupid. It's not only out of character, it's lazy." Hermione is brilliant, perceptive, and emotionally mature, but instead of using that depth to show her navigating the emotional complexities of their friendship, she's thrown in as a sarcastic side note. The scene becomes about who can throw the best insult, not about real teenage pain and jealousy. This problem hits harder in Order of the Phoenix, especially when Hermione constantly corrects others or shuts down Luna Lovegood. Her lines, though accurate, are delivered with a cold authority that turns her into a schoolteacher caricature. When she dismisses Luna's belief in the Thestrals, it's not the thoughtful Hermione we know, it's someone who's forgotten how to listen. The irony is painful. Hermione, once an outsider herself, now rolls her eyes at someone who dares to be different. She became a tool for the script to ground the story, but in doing so, lost her warmth. Even her line, "You'll be okay, Harry, you're a great wizard," in Philosopher's Stone, once full of heart, starts to feel mechanical in later films. Because when everything she says is delivered with an eye roll or exasperated tone, it stops meaning anything. Hermione Granger deserved to be more than the straight-faced balance to the boys' chaos. She had fire, passion, and yes, humour of her own, but they gave her catchphrases instead. Number 13, her transformation into a magical encyclopedia. In the dim corners of the Hogwarts library, where sunlight rarely touched the tops of the shelves, Hermione Granger became more than a student. She became a device. In scene after scene, her role shifted from the complex and emotional girl of the first books to something far less organic, a walking, talking magical encyclopedia. Her brilliance, once a trait that inspired admiration, morphed into a shortcut for the narrative. Instead of solving mysteries through collaboration, risk, and struggle, the trio increasingly relied on Hermione's instantaneous knowledge. And while this may have preserved the story's momentum, it often did so at the expense of character development, not just hers, but Harry's and Ron's as well. One of the clearest examples of this flattening of her character occurs in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Hermione remembers that there are books about nearly everything. Upon hearing that name, Nicholas Flamel, she runs to the library and emerges with a solution that should have taken days or required the input of all three characters. The moment becomes emblematic of what follows throughout the series. Hermione doesn't discover the answer through trial and error, nor does she share the struggle of uncovering secrets. She simply knows. The book reads, "Of course," said Hermione, "I read about him in The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts." It is as though the author needed a magical Google search and Hermione was cast in the role. By the time the events of the Chamber of Secrets unfold, this trait has crystallized. When the trio suspects something sinister is occurring with the attacks at Hogwarts, the mystery could have unfolded as a shared intellectual journey. Instead, Hermione disappears into the library and returns with a fully formed theory, even going so far as to brew Polyjuice Potion entirely on her own initiative. While her proactive nature is admirable, the fact that she uncovers the monster of Slytherin before anyone else, including the adults, places her on a pedestal that isolates her. The line from the book, "It's a basilisk," said Hermione, handing over a crumpled page torn from a library book, is delivered after she's already been petrified. Even in silence, she is the voice of reason and knowledge, reducing the agency of others. This dynamic becomes particularly frustrating in The Prisoner of Azkaban, a book rich with emotional complexity and moral ambiguity. The story teases opportunities for deep character growth. Harry's growing anger, Ron's insecurity, and Hermione's anxiety over time and loyalty. Instead of letting those threads evolve naturally, the plot uses Hermione's access to a time turner as both a magical tool and a narrative one. Her ability to be in two places at once offers not just convenience for her studies, but a convenient fix for the plot itself. It's not her character who finds the solution, it's her magical gadget and, by extension, the author's need for tidy resolution. Even in The Goblet of Fire, a book praised for its thematic maturity, Hermione is once again the bringer of knowledge rather than the seeker. When the group needs information about the Yule Ball, house elves, or magical contracts, it is Hermione who delivers the facts. Her campaign for SPEW, which could have been a complex subplot about social justice, empathy, and resistance, instead becomes background noise. The boys do not engage seriously with her concerns, and the narrative treats her activism more as an eccentricity than as part of her emotional arc. This flattens what could have been a transformative experience into another opportunity for Hermione to lecture. The problem becomes most glaring in The Order of the Phoenix, where the emotional stakes are at their highest. Harry is isolated, traumatized, and angry. The group is fractured, and tensions run high. Yet rather than letting Hermione's intelligence become a tool for mending rifts or forging new strategies, she is again used to feed information to the reader. When the DA is formed, she presents the rules, the spells, the logistics. When Harry has visions, she speculates. When no one understands the Department of Mysteries, she guesses. Her brilliance is wielded like a scalpel, slicing through uncertainty, but never evolving. She's not discovering, she's declaring. It is important to distinguish between being smart and being written as smart. In the early books, Hermione's knowledge is hard-earned. We see her buried in books, questioning professors, checking footnotes. Her intellect is part of her character, but as the series progresses, her answers arrive with less groundwork. Her knowledge begins to feel like prophecy. In The Half-Blood Prince, when everyone is baffled by the mysterious bookmarked property of the Half-Blood Prince, Hermione insists it must be dark magic. She's wrong, but instead of learning from the mistake, the narrative moves on without letting the error affect her. This refusal to allow her to be wrong weakens her humanity. By insulating Hermione from the normal failures of growth, the story limits what could have been a more compelling arc. Consider Ron, who stumbles through spells and doubts his worth, yet finds his strength in loyalty and moments of courage. Consider Harry, who rarely understands the world around him but learns through trial, error, and emotional sacrifice. Hermione, meanwhile, is denied this journey. She begins the series as the cleverest witch of her age, and she ends it much the same, without scars earned from personal transformation. This narrative flaw also affects the relationships between the trio. Harry and Ron increasingly become passive recipients of Hermione's wisdom. They consult her like a textbook rather than a friend. In scenes that should pulse with discovery and tension, they wait for her to tell them what to think. The dynamic becomes particularly apparent in The Deathly Hallows, where the trio is on the run. In a scene where they try to infiltrate the Ministry, Hermione not only devises the plan, she executes it, adapts it, and resolves its complications. There's little give and take, no shared puzzle solving. The boys follow her lead, not out of respect, but out of dependence. Number 14. Hermione's mysterious lack of fear. When Hermione Granger faced the 10-foot mountain troll in the girls' bathroom during her first year at Hogwarts, readers were meant to marvel at her quick thinking and loyalty. But a closer look reveals something unsettling. Hermione, an 11-year-old muggle-born witch trapped in a bathroom with a murderous beast, does not show a single sign of fear, not a scream, not a stumble. She hides behind a sink and survives, stoic, prepared, calculated. For a girl with no previous combat experience, whose parents are dentists with no magical knowledge, her reaction feels oddly superhuman. The books and films celebrate her brilliance, but in this scene and many others, what's missing is fear. Raw, human, irrational fear. The kind of fear that gives characters depth, weight, and vulnerability. What we see instead is a caricature of courage, a mask of calm so polished it strips her of relatability. Hermione is often caught in the heart of danger, yet the narrative rarely allows her to break. Take the Forbidden Forest sequence in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Harry and Draco are shivering with unease as they step into the forest's shadows. Fang, Hagrid's dog, whimpers. Ron is notably absent because he's deemed too scared. But Hermione, she volunteers. Not once does the text describe her being scared, even though they're in a forest where unicorns are slaughtered by unknown horrors. The forest is described as a place where people who go in don't always come out. Yet Hermione walks with composure, defying the basic psychological reactions of an 11-year-old confronted with death and darkness. In the Chamber of Secrets, when the school becomes a battlefield of petrified students, fear spreads like a virus. Teachers are on edge, students are escorted to classes, and rumours about the heir of Slytherin dominate every corridor. But once again, Hermione's reaction is clinical. She buries herself in research, turns down conversations, and disappears into the library. There is intelligence in her method, yes, but little evidence of emotional distress. When she finally gets petrified, it's almost as if the story found a way to pause her so that others could act. She never gets to express fear before she's frozen, literally and narratively, into silence. Consider her journey to the lair of Aragog in the Chamber of Secrets. Giant spiders, known to consume humans, crawl over the forest floor. Ron is in pieces, nearly vomiting from terror. Even Harry is visibly shaken. But Hermione is written out of this scene entirely. Was it a narrative mercy? One wonders if including her might have required giving her human traits, like trembling or hesitating. Perhaps her removal was a way to preserve the illusion. Hermione, the girl too logical to fear, too composed to collapse. It's not courage when fear is never there to conquer. It's something else, something robotic. The trend continues through The Prisoner of Azkaban. When the trio encounters the Dementors, the creatures that literally feed on fear and despair, Harry passes out. Ron trembles, but Hermione, who by all logical measure should also be deeply affected, seems almost immune. We learn that Hermione can see them and is affected, but her fear is always stated, never shown. "I felt cold," she admits, but it's an afterthought, not an experience. There is a subtle denial of her emotional landscape. The Dementors were an ideal opportunity to allow Hermione's inner life to emerge, to expose her insecurities or hidden sorrows. Instead, the scene reverts quickly to Harry's trauma. Hermione becomes a side figure again, clever and stable, almost annoyingly unshaken. Even in the Goblet of Fire, where the Triwizard Tournament introduces dangers that kill, Hermione remains mostly a calm strategist. When Harry dives into the Black Lake, pursued by Grindylows and merpeople, Hermione is worried, but again, more like a tutor concerned about a failing student than a friend fearing for her life. Her emotional reaction is understated. One might expect a scream, a prayer, a panic. None comes. Instead, she offers logic, plans, and cold observations. Even when Harry nearly dies during the maze task, Hermione's concern is expressed only through breathless questions and immediate problem-solving. Not once does she fall apart. In The Order of the Phoenix, the battle at the Department of Mysteries offers an unfiltered view of what war looks like for teenagers. There are curses flying, people bleeding, lives at stake. Harry is reckless, Ron is chaotic, Luna is otherworldly, but Hermione is composed. She manages to stun a Death Eater, keep calm under threat, and maintain control until she is knocked unconscious by a dark curse. The moment she's injured is the only time she's not talking, not directing, not teaching. It's telling. She must be rendered unconscious to stop functioning like a war machine. One of the most glaring examples of Hermione's emotional suppression comes during the events of the Half-Blood Prince. Dumbledore dies. The man who gave Hermione guidance, trust, and belief falls from a tower. Harry is broken. Ron is speechless. But Hermione, though teary-eyed, resumes her logical commentary almost instantly. She questions Snape's betrayal, references his past, theorizes about Horcruxes. Where is the girl who just lost her greatest mentor? Where is the shaking, broken Hermione who needs time to grieve? She becomes an exposition machine instead, offering answers when she should be allowed silence. By the time the Deathly Hallows arrives, Hermione is living in a tent, hunted by dark wizards, torn from her parents and forced into hiding. She has obliviated her own mother and father. This, by any measure, is trauma. But the books and films move past it. There is no exploration of her nightmares, no breakdowns, no scenes of guilt or regret. When Ron yells at her, when tensions rise, she defends herself but never truly unravels. The emotional toll is hinted at, but always neatly tied up by intellect. She becomes an emotional fortress, one whose strength begins to resemble emotional unavailability more than resilience. Number 15, inadequate exploration of her connection to the Muggle world. Hermione Granger was born to two Muggle parents, both dentists and raised entirely outside the magical world. This alone offers a landscape rich with potential, filled with moments of conflict, internal questioning, and the weight of existing between two different identities. And yet throughout the 7 Harry Potter books, the thread of Hermione's roots is never woven deeply into her story. The narrative flirts with the idea, glances toward it in brief mentions, but ultimately leaves it abandoned like a path not taken in a dark, forbidden forest. We never truly see the girl Hermione was before the Hogwarts Express carried her away from the only world she had ever known. She arrives in Philosopher's Stone fully formed, precocious, bookish, already absorbed into the magical community. There is no scene where she stares in disbelief at Diagon Alley like Harry does, no moment of watching her parents' bewilderment as they process a world where cauldrons and wands replace drills and fluoride treatments. The books deny us the emotional texture of a child bridging two worlds. Hermione's backstory is functionally erased, her identity severed from her upbringing. This omission deprives her character of a richer, more nuanced foundation. She becomes a Gryffindor first, a witch second, and a Muggle born only in dialogue and insult. In the magical world, blood status is a constant threat, a caste system deeply entrenched in culture and prejudice. Being Muggle-born should have placed Hermione in constant internal tension, but her moments of grappling with this are strangely hollow. When Draco Malfoy first calls her a mudblood in Chamber of Secrets, it sparks outrage and conflict. Yet it's Ron who reacts with vomiting slugs, not Hermione. She doesn't tremble with confusion or fear. She doesn't reflect on the pain of hearing her heritage weaponized. Her Muggle identity is used against her, but she never reclaims it or reflects on its importance. Her silence becomes a narrative absence. The books never give us a flashback to her childhood, no image of a small Hermione in a public library devouring science books, no memory of a classroom where she raised her hand too often, where she was teased for being weird. There's no scene where she struggles to explain Hogwarts to her Muggle friends, or where she misses the predictable logic of the non-magical world. The closest we get is in Goblet of Fire, when she mentions going on a skiing holiday with her parents during Christmas. It is a fleeting detail, tossed in as background noise rather than a significant thread of identity. Even her relationship with her parents is distant, abstract. They appear only briefly in Chamber of Secrets when the trio meets them at Flourish and Blots, and again in Deathly Hallows when Hermione reveals she has modified their memories to make them forget her entirely. The act is monumental. Erasing yourself from your parents' lives is a tragedy of operatic proportions, but the emotional fallout is never truly explored. There's no lingering grief, no moment of private sorrow. The scene is treated as a tactical decision, not the existential wound it truly is. We never see her write to them, miss them, remember their voices. For all we know, Hermione Granger could have sprung from the magical world itself, like Athena from the head of Zeus. Consider the Christmas holidays. While Harry stays at Hogwarts or visits the Burrow, Hermione often disappears. The narrative glosses over these absences, but they could have been opportunities. Imagine a scene where she returns home only to feel out of place, surrounded by muggle customs and conversations that now feel alien. Or a moment where she must hide her magical textbooks because her parents' friends are visiting. The awkward dinner conversations, the fear of slipping up, the loneliness of not belonging fully in either world, these could have deepened her character far beyond the smartest witch of her age. There is no moment where Hermione hesitates between the muggle and magical worlds. Her transition is seamless and therefore untrue. Real people carry pieces of their past with them. They stumble, they doubt, they miss what they left behind. Even when Ron leaves the trio in Deathly Hallows, Hermione doesn't consider returning to the safety of her parents' world. Instead, she clings to magic, to purpose, to Harry's mission. But why? What drives her? What does she lose, and what does she remember of where she came from? In Order of the Phoenix, the Ministry's smear campaign paints Harry and Dumbledore as unstable. The public distrusts magic. This could have been the perfect moment for Hermione to reflect on how muggles would perceive such power. Yet she offers no opinion, no insight from the perspective of someone raised in that world. Her knowledge of muggles becomes purely functional. She explains electricity or toothpaste when needed, but never questions the values of either world, never reflects on the scientific method versus magical spontaneity. There's no intellectual tension, no philosophical weight. The mirror of Erased reveals Harry's deepest desire, a family he never knew. We never see what Hermione would see. Does she long for acceptance, for her parents to understand her magical life, for both worlds to exist in harmony? The omission feels glaring. She is the character who most bridges two realities, and yet we never glimpse her dream, her internal contradiction. She is the daughter of muggles, a friend to wizards, and a crusader for house elves. But we never see the struggle that makes such convictions personal. Her activism with SPEW is often treated as comic relief, but it could have been so much more. A girl who came from a world where slavery is illegal, who now exists in a society where sentient beings are openly enslaved, this should create a moral earthquake within her. Instead, she becomes shrill, self-righteous, and is largely dismissed by her peers and the narrative itself. There is no reflection on how the wizarding world's injustices mirror real-world history, no parallel drawn to her own parents' values or modern muggle ethics. The opportunity for political depth is wasted. In Half-Blood Prince, she becomes more preoccupied with romantic tension than existential reflection. She competes with Lavender Brown for Ron's attention, burns with jealousy, and sulks when things don't go her way. This regression into emotional immaturity feels unearned, especially for a character so deeply rooted in logic and principle. Rather than wrestling with her heritage, her identity, or the growing threat of Voldemort's fascism, she is sidelined into adolescent tropes. The fire that once made her unique dims into something formulaic. Her muggle-born status should have been her shield and her scar. It should have shaped the way she saw the world, but instead it becomes a checkbox, a bit of trivia. The reader is told she is muggle-born but never truly feels it. There's no dissonance in her voice, no moments of longing for home. Compare this to Harry's ever-present ache for his parents. He sees them in the mirror of Erised, in his Patronus, in his dreams. Hermione's past, by contrast, is a blank slate, sterile, forgotten, as if the magic wiped it all away. Number 16, oversimplified romance development with Ron. It had been a journey of 6 years, an intricate weave of glances, insults, silences, shared fears, and rare tenderness, yet when Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger finally kissed in the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, the moment felt alarmingly unearned. Their relationship, long teased and endlessly speculated upon by readers and characters alike, concluded not with a crescendo of realization, but with a shrug of obligation. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, as the world collapsed around them, the emotional culmination of one of the series' most anticipated arcs was sealed not with a profound moment of clarity, but with a kiss that landed like a checkmark on a list. Hermione's journey had never been simple. From the moment she entered the series, she carried a fierce intellect, unrelenting principles, and a sharp sense of justice. Her dynamic with Ron was thorny, often flirtatious in the most immature of ways, and occasionally endearing. From the moment he mocked her in Philosopher's Stone, it's no wonder no one can stand her, to her tears in the bathroom as the troll approached, the seeds of their friction were planted early. But this friction never quite matured. Their arguments often remained petty, unresolved, or ignored. Time and again, Hermione grew in complexity, while Ron hovered near the emotional baseline of insecurity and deflection. The Yule Ball in Goblet of Fire provided what seemed like a turning point. Hermione arrived with Victor Crumb, radiant and unfamiliar, and Ron's reaction was predictably toxic. Instead of offering maturity or vulnerability, he lashed out with accusations and jealousy. "You're fraternizing with the enemy," he spat, not because he feared for her safety, but because he could not reconcile her autonomy with his expectations. Hermione's iconic line, "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort," struck at the heart of Ron's immaturity. It was a moment charged with fire, resentment, and potential. But it never led to anything concrete. The aftermath of that scene was silence, not growth. Through Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince, their dynamic remained stubbornly static. Ron dated Lavender Brown, not out of genuine affection, but as a thinly veiled attempt to provoke Hermione. The scenes between Hermione and Lavender, awkward and heavy with unspoken bitterness, served only to remind the reader that the two central characters were still playing schoolyard games. Hermione, who had matured into one of the moral centers of the series, remained entangled in emotional games that belonged to a far less evolved version of herself. Ron's lack of self-awareness and emotional intelligence continually clashed with Hermione's need for clarity and depth, but the narrative never addressed this gap with the seriousness it deserved. When Ron abandoned the trio in Deathly Hallows, Hermione was devastated. She cried, she pleaded, she sat by the radio listening for his name, but the scene lacked the narrative infrastructure to explain why she would be so heartbroken by someone who had consistently failed to rise to her level. It was only in this moment of absence that the story tried to convince us of their closeness, without ever having built it convincingly beforehand. The trauma of Ron's departure should have triggered a reckoning. Instead, it became a narrative excuse to frame his return as redemptive. Hermione forgave too quickly. There was no confrontation, no demand for explanation. The apology was drowned out by other plot points, and the depth of the betrayal was glossed over in favor of expediency. The kiss in the Chamber of Secrets, then, was meant to be the emotional climax, but it felt like a shortcut. The destruction of a Horcrux, a high-stakes mission, a surge of adrenaline, and then suddenly 6 years of inconsistent development are solved with a kiss. No confession, no reckoning, just a sudden rush toward physicality that didn't reflect the emotional journey supposedly leading up to it. Ron leapt forward and she flung her arms around him and kissed him full on the mouth, the book says. Harry, stunned, simply turns away. For a moment that was supposed to be one of the most awaited emotional payoffs. It lasted only a paragraph, and its aftermath was reduced to a joke about house elves. The kiss was not a moment of catharsis. It was an escape hatch from responsibility. This simplification not only undercut the characters but diluted the richness of their arc. Hermione deserved better. Ron deserved better too, if only he had been written with more emotional range. Their love story was never about fireworks. It should have been about gradual understanding, about earning one another through trial and growth. Instead, they were dragged into romance by the weight of fan expectations and the author's intent. Even J.K. Rowling later admitted she had second thoughts. "I wrote the Hermione-Ron relationship as a form of wish fulfillment," she told the Sunday Times. "That's how it was conceived, really, for reasons that have very little to do with literature and far more to do with me clinging to the plot as I first imagined it." That admission reveals what the narrative itself failed to address. The pairing did not evolve naturally. It was constructed from habit, not necessity. Hermione's character arc took her far from the girl who scolded Ron for not doing his homework. She became a warrior, a strategist, a woman of principle who defied authority to save lives. Ron's arc, while more subtle, remained rooted in his status as the perennial sidekick, jealous of Harry, insecure around Hermione, occasionally noble but rarely transformed. Their union, then, felt like a union of past selves, not present ones. The moment never felt like two equals meeting, but like two long-time neighbours finally deciding to date because they'd lived near each other for too long not to try. This dissonance became all the more glaring when compared to the richness of Harry and Ginny's relationship, brief though it was. Ginny, once a background character, blossomed into someone strong and vibrant, and their eventual connection felt like an evolution of shared trauma and mutual respect. In contrast, Ron and Hermione's connection never surpassed adolescence. It remained, to the end, entangled in unresolved sniping and jealous glances. Their kiss did not signal a new beginning, but a hasty conclusion. Even in the epilogue, the emotional gap lingered. The scene at King's Cross 19 years later is often cited as emotionally hollow. Ron jokes about using a confundus charm on the train conductor, while Hermione corrects him, still playing the straight man to his buffoonery. There is no intimacy, no gesture of growth. Their dynamic, in 19 years, remains exactly the same. That, more than anything, betrays the romantic arc. If love is supposed to change people, to deepen them, then theirs had only frozen them in place. Hermione remains the voice of reason. Ron remains the comic relief. They did not grow together, they grew apart and were stitched back together by narrative will. The tragedy here is not that Ron and Hermione ended up together. It's that the story didn't care enough to show us why they should. Love, especially in a saga about death, sacrifice and identity, should be more than inevitable. It should be necessary. Their union should have been a statement, a hard-won reward for years of mutual learning. Instead, it was a narrative obligation, a final bow to reader expectation that robbed both characters of a more meaningful conclusion. The book gave us the moment, but not the path to it. In a story where every character was shaped by trauma, fear, and the weight of impossible choices, romance should have been treated with the same care as war. Hermione, who suffered torture in Malfoy Manor, who obliviated her parents for their safety, who walked through fire for the sake of justice, was entitled to a romance born of mutual emotional truth. Ron, who struggled to believe in himself, who walked in the shadows of Harry and his brothers, needed someone who would challenge and elevate him, not just forgive and comfort him, but the story gave neither the opportunity to change each other meaningfully. Throughout Deathly Hallows, Harry and Hermione shared moments of intimacy, trust and pain. Their dance in the tent, set to Nick Cave's mournful "O Children" in the film adaptation, was filled with unspoken emotion. It was never romantic, but it was human. In that scene, the connection felt raw and real in a way that Hermione and Ron's kiss never did. It showed how two broken people could find brief solace in each other, a bond forged in shared loss and loyalty. That level of nuance was what the final kiss lacked. Even in the small moments, the way Hermione held Harry's hand, the way Ron sulked in the background, the emotional logic often felt misaligned. The story wanted Ron and Hermione to happen, but didn't know how to get them there. And so it skipped steps, hoping the audience would fill in the gaps with their own projections. But in a series so careful with world-building, that kind of negligence stood out. The emotional arc of two of the series' most beloved characters deserved more than borrowed tension and a single, sudden kiss. There is a cost to this kind of narrative shortcut. It diminishes the stakes. It tells readers that emotional complexity can be solved with proximity, that love is just the sum of time spent together. But Ron and Hermione's relationship was never about time. It was about tension, misunderstanding, and missed chances. To see it resolved without those elements being confronted or healed was a betrayal, not just of the characters, but of the readers who believed in them. What could have changed? Perhaps a quiet conversation after Ron's return, a shared confession in the tent, a moment of vulnerability, not urgency, perhaps a scene where Hermione laid bare her fears, not her fury, or Ron admitting in honest words why he ran and why he came back. Instead, the story gave us an explosion and a kiss with no bridge between them, and so we are left with a pairing that feels nostalgic, not necessary. A romance imagined but never earned. A final kiss that said, "This will do," rather than "this is right." And for characters as richly drawn as Hermione and Ron, "this will do" was never enough. Number 17, neglect of Hermione's inner conflicts. Hermione Granger stood as the brightest witch of her age, a model student with a spine of steel and a heart loyal to the last breath. But, for all her brilliance, there lingered an eerie hollowness behind her characterization, a strange absence where a rich tapestry of internal conflict should have been. Born to Muggle parents and hurled into the whirlwind of wizarding society, Hermione occupied a unique space in the Harry Potter universe. She straddled two worlds and should have been torn by the jagged contradictions of both. Yet, time and again, the narrative swerved around the chance to explore her fears, her guilt, her isolation, and instead gifted readers a girl almost too perfect to bleed. The missed opportunity to explore her internal struggles left behind a character whose emotional depth was hinted at, but never fully unearthed. The girl who cast spells better than most Hogwarts students was also the girl who had never heard of magic until she was 11. Imagine the weight of that revelation, to find out the world she knew was only half the story, that her parents would never understand a vital part of who she had become. Yet the books gloss over this with startling brevity. Hermione never seems to flinch when her two worlds collide. She never betrays a crack in the armor when her identity as a Muggle-born, a so-called mudblood, becomes a weapon in the mouths of the elite pure-bloods. When Draco Malfoy spits that filthy slur at her in the Chamber of Secrets, Ron leaps to her defense while Hermione stands in dignified silence. But silence isn't always strength. Sometimes it's a vacuum where emotion ought to roar. That word, mudblood, should have unraveled something in her. It should have planted seeds of shame, confusion, even rebellion. She should have questioned why she fought to belong in a world that despised her blood, but instead she simply becomes more efficient, more rigid, more rule-abiding, as if perfection could insulate her from pain. The narrative lets her run from introspection, painting her strength in flawless logic and endless preparation. Readers never see her cry alone, questioning her place in the magical world. That silence flattens her complexity. She is allowed to be clever but not conflicted. Even in Goblet of Fire, when she's mocked for standing by the rights of House Elves, the emotional core of her activism is skipped. She's ridiculed by her friends, dismissed as obsessive, and yet she continues her campaign with unyielding resolve. But where is the personal hurt, the fire, the moment of despair? What drove her to care so deeply? Was it guilt over privilege, a witch among Muggles, now powerful beyond her family's comprehension, or was it projection? A Muggle-born empathizing with the enslaved? We're never told. There's no moment where she confronts her motivations, no night spent wondering whether she's making a difference or simply being mocked into silence. The films are even more negligent. sanding down the edges of her personality into a poster-perfect heroine. Gone is her neurotic panic before exams, her desperate attempts to be accepted by a world that constantly questions her worth. Instead, Emma Watson's Hermione is calm, poised, and nearly invulnerable. It's aesthetically pleasing but emotionally sterile. We lose the trembling humanity that made her book counterpart so endearing, even in her moments of arrogance or insecurity. When Professor Snape humiliates her for being an insufferable know-it-all in Prisoner of Azkaban, the insult stings, but only briefly. There's no lingering sense that Hermione questions her intelligence, no internal monologue where she doubts whether she's loved for who she is or merely respected for what she knows. Even more haunting is the treatment of her parents, muggles whose lives are radically altered by their daughter's new reality. They are background shadows void of names or emotional resonance. In Deathly Hallows, Hermione casts a memory charm on them, erasing herself from their lives to protect them. It's one of the most morally complicated acts in the entire series, a moment ripe for introspection. But it's executed in a breath, a single line, a quiet spell, and then it's gone. Readers are left to imagine her anguish. There are no flashbacks, no letters, no dreams haunted by her mother's forgotten face or her father's erased love. And when the war ends, there's no closure, no return to those she sacrificed so much to save. The emotional fallout is not just unspoken, it's unwritten. Contrast this with Harry's perpetual inner monologue. His doubts, fears, anger, and grief given ample space to breathe and evolve. Ron, too, wrestles with envy, inferiority, and identity, especially in Deathly Hallows, where he abandons his friends in a fit of pent-up resentment. These boys are allowed to break. They're allowed to rage, sulk, and return transformed. Hermione, by contrast, is rarely permitted that same emotional spectrum. She is the steady one, the rational mind, the emotional support, and while that role is noble, it becomes reductive when it's all she's allowed to be. The unfairness becomes starker when we remember that Hermione's character was supposedly modelled on Rowling herself, a girl who read obsessively, who feared failure, who chased perfection because she feared irrelevance. Why then does Hermione never falter beneath that burden? Why is she not allowed to crumble under the pressure of being right all the time? When Harry and Ron ignore her or snap at her, she withdraws but never retaliates emotionally. Her tears in Sorcerer's Stone after Ron's cruel words about not needing her help hint at a deeper fragility. But that vulnerability is quickly patched over by a renewed sense of usefulness when she helps them with the troll. Her emotional needs are silenced in favor of narrative function. One would think that being the most brilliant muggle-born at Hogwarts would come with imposter syndrome. There should be moments where Hermione doubts her magic, wonders if she's merely parroting spells rather than embodying them. There should be moments where she feels the distance from her peers, not in blood, but in culture. She didn't grow up with tales of Grindelwald or enchanted toys. She had encyclopedias and public libraries. Where is the moment she feels unmoored, alien in both worlds? That is the heartbreak the narrative never delivers. Even her friendship with Harry is one-sided in emotional depth. She comforts him, supports him, saves him time and again. But does he ever sit with her pain? When she's tortured at Malfoy Manor, it's a brutal and intimate violation, yet it's Ron who reacts with emotional devastation. We are shown his trauma, not hers. Her screams are unforgettable, but her recovery is unseen. There is no moment of catharsis, no whispered conversation in the aftermath. Hermione survives and the story moves on, as though resilience were the same as healing. In Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore's army is formed and Hogwarts becomes a battlefield of ideology, Hermione becomes a revolutionary. But even then, her motivations are portrayed through strategy, not emotion. There is no private scene where she wrestles with fear, not fear of physical pain, but of being betrayed, expelled, or losing herself in a cause she barely understands. The war ages everyone, but Hermione never seems to age in pain, only in wisdom, as if suffering were a footnote in her journey. Her romance with Ron, too, is stripped of emotional substance. It simmers in the background, punctuated by jealous glances and awkward silences until the final book forces it into fruition. But where is the emotional conversation? Where is the moment Hermione asks whether she is loved for who she is or merely admired from afar? Even in the pivotal scene where Ron returns after abandoning them, the emotional terrain is dominated by Harry. Hermione's fury is theatrical but not layered, not the fury of betrayal rooted in years of unmet needs or secret hopes. It feels reactive, not reflective. In a world where bloodlines define worth, Hermione's existence should be an act of rebellion. She should have moments of bitterness, of fatigue, of resenting the very magic she worked so hard to master. But she's never allowed to hate the world that hates her. She's never allowed to question whether the sacrifice is worth it. Her bravery is a fact, not a journey. It's handed to the audience in her perfect spells and quick thinking, not earned through vulnerability and scars. We know she reads to escape. We know she studies to prove herself. But we never see the night she reads Hogwarts, a history not to learn, but to feel like she belongs. We never see her fingers tremble when holding her wand, wondering if the magic will obey her muggle-born hands. These are the scenes that should have existed, not for drama but for truth. The truth that identity is not just about labels, but about the chaos inside when those labels collide. In Half-Blood Prince, as the world around her spirals into terror and uncertainty, Hermione remains the voice of reason. But who soothes her when reason fails? Who hears her scream when logic cannot shield her from loss? Dumbledore dies, and Harry is devastated. But Hermione, her grief is implied, not explored. She does not rage at the loss of the one adult who saw her potential. She does not retreat into books or spells in an attempt to resurrect control. She just continues as if stoicism were the same as strength. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts arrives, Hermione is a warrior, brave, brilliant, essential, but the emotional cost of becoming that warrior is never paid on the page. She loses friends, kills enemies, witnesses death, and we never sit with her afterward, never see her nightmares, never feel her hands shake over the graves. She is granted survival, but denied transformation. And that makes her arc a tragedy of omission. The final epilogue gives us a grown Hermione, successful and serene. She has achieved everything: career, love, family. But the ghosts of her journey are nowhere in sight. There's no mention of the parents whose memories she stole, no reflection on the war that took her youth. She is fulfilled, but not whole. Her past has been sanitized, her struggles erased. A character who stood at the crossroads of two worlds deserved a story that honored the tension between them. But instead of showing her grappling with that identity, the narrative chose to celebrate her perfection. And in doing so, it denied readers the chance to witness her true greatness, not as the girl who had all the answers, but as the girl who dared to ask the hardest questions. Number 18, The Torture by Bellatrix, and the silence that followed. Of all the disappointments hidden within the folds of the Harry Potter series, few are as quietly persistent and strangely overlooked as the lonely arc of Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age who, despite her brilliance, courage, and loyalty, remains curiously isolated from the girls around her. In a school brimming with students, where laughter echoed through the halls and shared secrets passed between dormitory beds, Hermione's lack of real female friendship stands out not as a coincidence, but as a flaw in the storytelling itself. She walks beside Harry and Ron, solves their problems, and fights their battles, yet the warmth of sisterhood, the gentle strength of girlhood companionship, is nowhere to be found in her journey. That silence is telling. That void is not an accident. In the Gryffindor girls' dormitory, Hermione shares a space with Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil, but there is no sign of closeness, no scene of whispered conversation in the candlelit hours, no laughter over shared chocolate frogs, no confessions about fears or hopes. Instead, when Lavender begins dating Ron in Half-Blood Prince, the story makes Hermione bitter and withdrawn. The narrative positions Lavender as shallow, annoying, and overly affectionate, and Hermione responds with visible disgust. But where is the complexity? Where is the empathy from the girl who cried over house elf rights? Instead of exploring jealousy, emotional growth, or even reconciliation, the story pits two girls against each other. Over a Boy, the chance to show Hermione finding grace, or perhaps learning to open her heart to girls outside of her comfort zone, is lost. Even Ginny Weasley, who had every reason and opportunity to become Hermione's closest friend, is kept at arm's length for the majority of the series. Though they interact, Ginny is often portrayed more as Ron's little sister or Harry's eventual love interest than as someone who truly connects with Hermione. They don't study together, they don't confide in each other. In Order of the Phoenix, Ginny joins Dumbledore's army, fights at the Ministry, and even comforts Hermione when she's hexed by Umbridge's detentions, but their friendship never matures beyond the utilitarian. There is no defining moment that shows a bond forming between them, no visible affection, no shared struggles, not even a heartfelt conversation, despite both having endured pain, danger, and isolation. Luna Lovegood offers another missed opportunity. Luna is a deeply complex character, strange, wise, emotionally perceptive, and courageous. She sees the world differently and suffers because of it. Hermione, a champion of justice and tolerance, might have been a natural ally to Luna, but when they first meet, Hermione mocks her beliefs about magical creatures. She rolls her eyes. She dismisses Luna's eccentricity with the same arrogance that she fights against when directed at herself. In Order of the Phoenix, Luna fights beside them at the Department of Mysteries, endures the loss of her mother, and shows a quiet bravery that rivals any Gryffindor's. Still, the connection between her and Hermione remains superficial. There is no scene of bonding, of mutual recognition between two girls who are, in their own ways, outsiders. Then there's the Patil twins. In Goblet of Fire, Parvati is Ron's date to the Yule Ball and Padma is Harry's. Hermione, stunning in her periwinkle dress and transformation, steals the spotlight, yet this moment of femininity and pride is not shared with them. Instead, she walks past them, exists separate from them, as though the other girls are background decorations. The twins are given no depth, and Hermione shows no curiosity toward them, no kindness or initiative to bridge the dormitory silence. It is striking that even during an event meant to celebrate youth and joy, Hermione remains isolated in her own quiet. Narrative. Why does the cleverest girl in school have no female confidant? The books show Hermione spending endless hours in the library, in study sessions, in magical investigations. Could the narrative not spare a moment to show her reading with Ginny or Luna? Could she not have brainstormed SPEW strategies with Padma, a fellow intellectual? Could she not have found a kindred spirit in Penelope Clearwater, Percy's studious girlfriend? But these possibilities are never explored. The only constant is her role as the female voice of the trio, bookish, serious, reliable, but never fully female in the emotional or communal sense. Hermione's function in the story becomes clearer the more one examines her placement. She is a support system, a problem solver, a buffer between Harry and Ron. She is logic and loyalty, stitched tightly into the framework of their journey. But she is rarely given the freedom to have her own emotional universe, independent of the boys. Her grief, her desires, her emotional needs are nearly always filtered through the lens of Harry or Ron's experiences. Even her greatest heartbreak, Ron's relationship with Lavender, is written in service of a romantic subplot, not a commentary on her loneliness or her longing for female solidarity. The injustice of this narrative is not just personal to Hermione, it is structural. In a world as vast and rich as Rowling's, where houses are defined by their traits, where identity is shaped by courage, ambition, wisdom, and loyalty, where dozens of named girls walk the halls of Hogwarts, it is deeply troubling that none of them becomes Hermione's emotional anchor. In contrast, Harry and Ron have layers of male friendship: Seamus and Dean, Neville, the Weasley brothers. Harry even finds emotional kinship with Sirius, Lupin, and Dumbledore. Hermione has no such network. Even Professor McGonagall, stern but fair, is distant. There is no maternal warmth, no female mentorship, no space carved out for Hermione to simply be a girl among girls. This exclusion is not merely a matter of screen time or narrative focus, it reshapes who Hermione becomes. She is forced to mature in solitude. She becomes a warrior in intellectual armor, a girl who rarely shares her vulnerabilities unless pressed. Her tears are private. Her fears are locked behind logic. Even when she's tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange at Malfoy Manor, it is Harry and Ron who mourn her pain. No girl holds her hand. No girl helps her heal. This emotional solitude is not strength, it is neglect, wrapped in the illusion of independence. The loss here is not just Hermione's. The readers, especially the girls, are denied the portrayal of female friendship as a force of magic in its own right. Imagine the power of a scene where Hermione and Ginny talk about the pressures of being close to Harry and Ron. Imagine Luna helping Hermione through nightmares with tales of invisible creatures that eat fear. Imagine Parvati or Lavender defending Hermione when others mock her. Instead, the books leave Hermione's emotional growth suspended in the cold corridors of function and duty. And yet there were glimpses, fleeting and unsustained, that hinted at what could have been. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio hides in Grimmauld Place, Ginny sends Hermione a warm, hopeful note. But it's just a note. In the Battle of Hogwarts, the girls fight together, but again there is no conversation, no shared look, no sisterhood forged in fire. The final battle could have been a tapestry of friendships and farewells, of girls standing shoulder to shoulder, but it remains largely a male-dominated spectacle. One might argue that Hermione doesn't need female friends, that her bond with Harry and Ron is enough. But such a defense diminishes her humanity. People need community. Girls, especially those who carry the burdens of intellect and idealism, need mirrors in others. They need laughter, compassion, advice, and grounding. Hermione is allowed none of this. Her solitude is seen as a sign of discipline, but in truth it is a mark of emotional starvation. The irony is that Hermione is written as a feminist icon, intelligent, driven, powerful. But true feminism is not just about outsmarting boys or surviving trauma. It is about connection, collaboration, and the richness of shared experience. Hermione's absence of female friendships weakens that legacy. She breaks barriers in the classroom, but she is alone in the common room. She wins battles, but loses the quiet victories of friendship. A scene in Prisoner of Azkaban is particularly revealing. After an argument with Ron over Crookshanks and Scabbers, Hermione retreats, overwhelmed. She returns to the library. She isolates. There is no girl to comfort her, no friend to whisper, "He'll come around," or offer her a biscuit. Her pain becomes internal, wrapped in books and silence. That silence stretches across all 7 books. The films, too, fail to correct this. Hermione's moments with Ginny are limited to background glances. Her interactions with Luna are polite but distant. The dormitory scenes are practically non-existent. The few moments where Hermione might have expressed femininity, dressing for the Yule Ball, crying after Ron's cruelty, are not shared with girls but observed by boys. Even her tears become a lesson for them, not a bond for her. It would have taken so little to change this. A scene with Hermione and Ginny lying in bed, talking about their futures. A shot of Luna and Hermione researching magical creatures together. A moment of shared laughter over a failed potion with Parvati. These scenes would have required no magical spell, no elaborate plot device. Just attention, just intention, just care. for the emotional interior of a girl whose life revolved around saving others. Instead, Hermione becomes a symbol of what happens when a girl is asked to carry the world without being allowed to share her burdens. She is strong but not held. She is brilliant but not seen. Her heart is full but unheard. The story moves forward, triumphant, but the absence of female friendship leaves a hollow space in the reader's chest, a quiet wondering, why must the smartest girl in school be so alone? That question lingers long after the last page is turned. It echoes in every girl who has ever felt like the only one in the room. It calls out in every reader who once searched the books for a kindred spirit and found Hermione, but not the warmth of her being loved by her own. For all the magic that the series conjures, it is here, in the missing story of her sisterhood, that one finds the spell that was never cast. Number 19, ignoring her friendships with other girls. In the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, while the castle shook and the sky bled fire, Hermione Granger stood among the greatest witches and wizards of her generation, and yet her presence faded into the background like a ghost in the fog. For a character who had once been the brightest witch of her age, who had solved ancient riddles, faced down Death Eaters, and time-travelled to save lives, the final confrontation of the wizarding world reduced her to a supporting role. As Harry raced toward his destiny and Neville rose to unexpected greatness, Hermione, and the girl who had once fearlessly walked through fire and logic traps, was given little more than fragments of participation. Her talents, intellect, and emotional depth were sidelined in favor of simpler, louder acts of heroism, and in doing so, the story betrayed part of its own heart. While Ron and Hermione do destroy a Horcrux, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, in the Chamber of Secrets, the moment is diluted by their sudden, awkward kiss. For all the tension and complexity that had defined their relationship, their romantic culmination is delivered not in a moment of deep connection, but during a rush of adrenaline, undercutting both the seriousness of their mission and the gravity of the scene. The destruction of the Horcrux, a significant act by any measure, is overshadowed by a romantic payoff that feels more like fan service than earned resolution. And then after this scene, Hermione fades into the ensemble, her presence lessening as others take centre stage. Neville Longbottom, once the clumsy classmate with a toad and poor spellwork, is given the final glorious blow to Voldemort's soul. He beheads Nagini with the sword of Gryffindor, cutting down the final Horcrux in a scene of triumphant courage. The boy who had grown in the shadows finally steps into the light. Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy, once a foil to Harry's morality, is offered a redemptive moment when Harry saves his life in the Room of Requirement. Even Percy Weasley returns in glory, reconciling with his family and fighting alongside them. But Hermione, who spent years preparing for this very apocalypse, who carried an enchanted purse with tools for every disaster, who modified her parents' memories and erased herself from their lives for the sake of the mission, she is given no such defining moment. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Hermione is the planner, the researcher, the voice of reason. It is she who saves them from death countless times, from apparating them out of the Ministry of Magic to breaking into Gringotts with Polyjuice Potion and dragon-based escape tactics. She obliviates her parents with tears in her eyes, creates protective enchantments while camping in the woods, and keeps Harry and Ron from falling apart in the face of despair. And yet, in the final crescendo of the saga, when the violins should have swelled for her final act of brilliance, the music barely acknowledged her presence. The book describes the chaos of the final battle with scattershot glimpses. The battle was everywhere. Witches and wizards were dueling all over the place. In this scatter, Hermione is barely spotlighted. She fights, certainly. She defends herself and others, but there is no distinct beat that belongs to her alone. She does not get a moment like McGonagall conjuring stone knights or Molly Weasley dueling Bellatrix. Her actions are woven into the general noise rather than standing as statements of personal triumph or resolution. For someone whose entire identity was shaped by justice, intellect, and moral clarity, this treatment feels like a misstep, or worse, an erasure. Hermione's arc had always been about proving her worth in a world that doubted her. As a Muggle-born, she entered the wizarding world carrying the weight of prejudice. She fought for house elf rights, prepared rigorously for every exam, and earned the respect of even her most skeptical professors. She was mocked by Draco, dismissed by Snape, and underestimated by the magical elite. And yet she rose, not with brute strength, but with knowledge, perseverance, and heart. In the final battle, the stage was set for her vindication, a moment where the girl who had been called an insufferable know-it-all would become the decisive hand that saved the world. But that moment never came. The imbalance becomes more evident when one considers how deeply Harry's success depended on her throughout the series. It was Hermione who figured out that the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets was travelling through pipes. It was Hermione who used the time-turner to save Sirius Black and Buckbeak. It was Hermione who carried an entire tent, food, and books during the Horcrux hunt. She was the one who deciphered Dumbledore's clues and who read the tales of Beedle the Bard closely enough to understand the legend of the Deathly Hallows. Without her, Harry would not have survived. And yet, in the final battle, the culmination of all their sacrifices, she becomes a shadow, supportive but indistinct. One of the more glaring oversights is how little the narrative explores Hermione's emotional stakes during the battle. Her parents are safe in Australia, but everything else she has grown to love, Hogwarts, her friends, the ideals she has fought for, is under threat. And yet we are given no scene of her confronting this existential dread, no moment of fierce protection for the school she once adored, no confrontation with those who perpetuated the bigotry she so abhorred. Even her most personal enemy, Bellatrix Lestrange, who tortured her at Malfoy Manor, is given no final reckoning with Hermione. Instead, that catharsis is handed to Molly Weasley, a character we love, but one who had far less narrative weight in this specific arc of justice. The lack of focus on Hermione is not just an oversight of action, but of thematic consistency. The series often presented her as the voice of ethical clarity. It was Hermione who first challenged the status quo, whether through her outrage at the treatment of magical creatures or her insistence that rules mattered even when inconvenient. During the Battle of Hogwarts, the lines between chaos and justice blur. There were opportunities for her to step into a role not just of combat, but of moral leadership, to guide younger students, to help organize the defense, to confront the ideologies that had dehumanized her. But the narrative didn't allow her that space. A story thrives on payoff, on giving its characters endings that resonate with the journeys they've taken. Neville's arc pays off because his growth from fearful boy to heroic leader is affirmed. Draco's small redemptive beat works because it completes his arc of moral hesitation. Even Snape in Death receives a full circle moment that redefines our understanding of him. But Hermione, the most consistent moral compass in the series, is denied such a climax. Her intellect is not the key to victory. Her courage is not the final shield. Her voice, always the first to speak for justice, is largely silent in the final reckoning. This issue is not only in the books, but doubly emphasized in the films. Emma Watson, whose performance brought so much dimension to the character, is given little more than reaction shots during the final battle. Scenes are cut or condensed, dialogue is shortened. The Chamber of Secrets Horcrux scene is stripped of tension and reduced to a quick slash and a kiss. The visual narrative centers almost entirely around Harry, with Ron and Neville receiving side glory. Hermione becomes a companion, a helper, not the heroine she truly was. One of the few unique contributions she makes during the battle is suggesting to release the basilisk's fang again to destroy the Horcrux. But even that is executed swiftly, without narrative weight. The films do not allow her the pause that characters like Harry or even McGonagall receive. She is in motion, but her actions feel like background mechanics rather than emotionally resonant beats. Her trauma at being tortured by Bellatrix, her years of intellectual preparation, and her radical empathy all are left unresolved. It's jarring because the saga so often treated Hermione as indispensable. When Umbridge took over Hogwarts, Hermione led Harry to the Forbidden Forest with cunning and subterfuge. When Harry despaired in the forest, she stayed with him through long, cold nights, never abandoning hope. When faced with impossible odds, she never hesitated to act. She cast defensive charms tirelessly, argued passionately, and even risked her own soul with the Horcrux locket. She deserved a moment where her strength wasn't quiet or functional, but bright and undeniable. A fitting scene might have involved her using her vast knowledge to undo a crucial curse, or confronting Bellatrix with focused fury and outdueling her, or perhaps rallying the remaining fighters with a speech that cut through the despair. Instead, she is swept along in a current of others' stories, her own voice barely heard above the roar. For a character defined by intellect and agency, this silence is more deafening than any scream. The injustice of this sidelining is felt even more acutely when readers recall how Hermione often carried the emotional weight of the trio. She was the one who first understood the pain of being different, the one who grappled with loneliness in her early years at Hogwarts. She was also the one who often took the moral high ground, pushing the others toward better choices, that she would not be afforded a moment to reflect on what the war had cost, or to assert what the victory meant, is a failure not of character, but of narrative structure. In the aftermath, we are told very little. Hermione survives, she marries Ron, she has children, she becomes Minister for Magic according to post-series canon. These are achievements, certainly, but they are told to us, not shown. The battle, the moment where her qualities could have changed history, becomes just another event she participated in, not a moment that transformed her or let her shine. It is the triumph that should have been hers, but which slipped quietly past her hands. In a series so often driven by character, by their flaws, their growth, and their redemptions, to ignore Hermione's potential in the final act is to ignore the heart of her journey. She was never just a sidekick. She was never just the girl in the trio. She was a revolutionary, quietly, intelligently, and fiercely. The battle should have let her prove it one last time, but in the end, she stood in the background while others seized the light. And for a generation of readers who found in her a mirror, a guide, and a hero, that omission still hurts. Number 20. Her passive role in the final battle. Of all the fates assigned to beloved characters after the Battle of Hogwarts, few feel as curiously hollow as Hermione Granger's ascent to the Ministry of Magic. The epilogue tells us that she becomes a high-ranking official, eventually Minister for Magic. But the journey between her school years and that lofty title is shrouded in a strange silence. Hermione, whose every move in the books was charged with purpose and fierce determination, is suddenly gifted with authority as though it were a reward for surviving. The transition is abrupt, unexplored, and fundamentally out of sync with the richly detailed development she had been afforded throughout the series. We watched her fight for house elves, brave torture at Malfoy Manor, and destroy a Horcrux with trembling hands. But not once are we shown why she chose to enter wizarding politics or how she shaped it once she did. Hermione was never passive. She did not float with the current. She engineered her own waves. She brewed Polyjuice Potion at 12, stormed the Department of Mysteries at 15, and erased herself from her parents' memories to protect them from Voldemort's wrath. These were not the actions of someone destined to be reduced to a line on a future resume. And yet, that is what she became in the narrative's aftermath, a name on a plaque, a footnote in the New World Order. There's a stark incongruity between the Hermione we knew, headstrong, intellectual, emotionally complex, and the Hermione who, we're told, simply went into public service because the war ended. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, her passion for social justice burned bright. Her creation of SPEW, often mocked by her friends, was a testament to her moral conviction. She was a teenager trying to change the system before she was even fully part of it. It stands to reason that such a person would want to overhaul the ministry, especially after witnessing its failures firsthand. The smear campaign against Harry, the wrongful imprisonment of innocents, and the infiltration by Death Eaters. And yet the text never lets her take up that fight. It allows her to exist in an abstract future where she is powerful, but not in a story where she earns it. This omission is particularly glaring when one considers how vividly other post-war fates are hinted at. Ron works at the Ministry too, but later joins George at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, a detail that feels plausible, rooted in his character. Harry becomes an Auror, eventually head of the department, fitting given his lifelong battle against dark forces. But Hermione's political path, arguably the most narratively rich potential of the trio, is treated like an afterthought. We are told she returned to Hogwarts to complete her education and that she took up a career in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, but the emotional and ideological evolution behind this is absent. The Ministry of Magic, once portrayed as a monolith of bureaucracy and corruption, could have served as Hermione's ultimate challenge. A story about her navigating that world, reforming laws, standing up to entrenched interests, battling magical conservatism, could have been more compelling than any wizarding duel. She had the intellect, the fire, and the drive. In Order of the Phoenix, she recognized how dangerous unchecked power could be, exemplified by her loathing of Dolores Umbridge. "You know, I think we've got a seriously good chance of winning the House Cup this year." But her victory should not have been confined to school trophies. It should have played out on the grand stage of magical governance. There is also an emotional disservice in the way her transition is skipped. The war scarred Hermione. She was tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange, witnessed death, and was hunted like prey. These traumas would inevitably shape her worldview. How did they influence her policies? Did she campaign for better protections for Muggle-borns? Did she purge the Ministry of lingering Death Eater sympathizers? We are never told. The Ministry becomes a vague building she enters one day and years later controls. This lack of narrative investment robs her of growth and denies readers the closure they deserve. In truth, the Hermione we followed through 7 books would never have slipped quietly into a government office. She would have demanded reform, risked unpopularity, perhaps even resigned in protest at some point. A character this dynamic deserved friction, resistance, and, ultimately, triumph. Instead, we are given a straight line with no obstacles. Her appointment feels unearned, not because she lacked the qualifications, but because the story doesn't bother to show them being put to use. Even a single chapter in the aftermath could have made a difference. Imagine Hermione debating legislation with old guard politicians, quoting goblin treaties, standing on the floor of the Wizengamot. Instead, we are left with assumptions. Was her drive for equality quelled, or magnified by power? Did she face opposition from those who doubted a Muggle-born witch? Did she change the way magical creatures were treated? Not only house elves, but centaurs, goblins, and giants? These were questions ripe for exploration, but they were buried beneath the weight of a hurried ending. Some might argue that J.K. Rowling's epilogue was designed to provide hope, not political detail. But hope, to be meaningful, must be built on narrative foundation. We see Hermione sending her daughter off to Hogwarts, a symbol of continuity. But what lies between that platform and the ruins of Hogwarts is a black hole. In Deathly Hallows, she rips herself from the only family she has to fight for justice. In the epilogue, she is dressed for a school farewell. the steps in between are invisible. Even in The Cursed Child, her role as minister is more functional than meaningful. She serves the plot, not the other way around. Her brilliance is assumed, not demonstrated. She is now an authority figure who can jail or pardon, but the Hermione who once stood trembling in the forbidden forest clutching Harry's hand has vanished. She deserved better than to be distilled into a bureaucrat with a title. A fuller arc could have explored how her youthful idealism translated into adult realism, how she learned to compromise or refused to. There is, of course, an inherent tragedy in this neglect. Hermione was the most grounded of the trio. She had the greatest potential for transformation, not in terms of values, but in scale. She understood both the muggle and magical worlds. Her perspective was singular. When she spoke about oppression, she knew it from multiple fronts as a girl, a muggle-born, a perfectionist, and a fighter. To watch that perspective go unexplored is a literary injustice. Hermione also symbolized education and its power. She was the one poring over books while others duelled. She quoted law, remembered precedents, and used intellect where others used force. Her entire ethos was built around understanding systems. So why not show her confronting the biggest one? Let her rewrite the laws that allowed Umbridge to flourish, the same laws that let a corrupt ministry accuse her friends of terrorism. Let her be the reckoning. Even within the books, Hermione often served as the conscience of the group. She questioned Harry when he acted rashly and challenged Ron when he was cruel. She did not seek popularity, she sought justice. In Goblet of Fire, she spent hours knitting hats for house elves, despite their resistance, because the principle mattered more than the result. That same woman could have overhauled entire departments, but we never see her even try. A more satisfying resolution would have mirrored her original strengths, a stubborn love of truth, a need to fix broken systems, and a refusal to be complicit in silence. That's the Hermione readers knew. A Hermione who accepts a desk at the ministry without a struggle, a speech, or even a scene is not the same girl who stood in front of Buckbeak with a time-turner in hand, whispering to Harry that saving lives matters more than following rules. This oversight also reflects a broader issue in the depiction of female ambition. Hermione was often belittled for her intensity, but she was never ashamed of it. Her future, then, should have validated that fire, not dulled it. She should have been allowed to make enemies, take risks, and bear the cost of her ideals. The fact that we don't see that arc perpetuates the idea that women's growth can be summarized, not explored. What makes this omission sting is that the raw material was all there. We were given a heroine with the tools to change her world, and then denied the blueprint for how she did. Books and cleverness, there are more important things. Friendship and bravery, she once said. But her story had all three and deserved an ending that showed how she balanced them. Did she write a book, start a school, mentor young witches? The silence is thunderous. In the end, we are left with a paradox. Hermione Granger, the girl who prepared for everything, is unprepared for her own ending. She is brilliant, brave, and full of conviction. But those qualities are treated as credentials, not catalysts. Her post-war life exists in the shadows of implication. We are told she succeeds, but not why, not how, and not at what cost. She deserved a legacy forged in scenes, not summaries. Her path to power should have been a narrative of struggle, resistance, and impact. She should have stood in the ministry not just as a symbol of change, but as its architect. Instead, she is remembered not for the policies she wrote or the lives she changed, but for a vague title in a vague future. Hermione Granger's story didn't end, it was left untold. Number 21. Transition to the Ministry of Magic without explanation. Hermione Granger, for all her brilliance and sharpness, remains the most emotionally guarded of the Golden Trio. Throughout the 7-book saga, we see her excel in classes, recite laws verbatim, and conjure spells with effortless precision. Yet something crucial is missing. When the narrative peels back layers of Harry's trauma, his fear of dementors, his guilt over Cedric's death, or lingers on Ron's inferiority complex and crippling arachnophobia, Hermione is left almost untouched. There is a disturbing emptiness where her vulnerability should be. The only canonical fear explicitly shown is her boggart, Professor McGonagall telling her she failed all her exams. A moment of levity, played for laughs. For a war character who goes through war, torture, and the loss of family, this seems woefully insufficient. We are told repeatedly that Hermione is one of the bravest witches of her age. She walks into danger beside Harry and Ron, confronts Death Eaters, fights in battles, and even uses a time-turner to take extra classes. But bravery is not the absence of fear, it is action in spite of it. And yet, we never truly see what makes Hermione afraid. Her emotional journey is flatlined. There are no nights spent crying in the common room, no breakdowns behind closed doors, no tremors in her hands when the wand is raised. She is always ready, always rational, always composed. It gives the impression that Hermione is less a character and more a machine. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, during Professor Lupin's boggart lesson, we watch as Neville sees Snape, Parvati sees a mummy, and Ron screams at a giant spider. But when Hermione steps up, her boggart turns into McGonagall, delivering bad news about exams. This is not nothing, but it's deeply underwhelming. Hermione's was Professor McGonagall telling her she'd failed everything, Lupin later says. This one-liner encapsulates how Rowling treats Hermione's psyche, reduced to a punchline about her overachieving nature. In contrast, Harry falls unconscious when faced with a Dementor, Ron nearly vomits, and Neville must be coaxed into facing his greatest terror. Hermione, she gets a bad grade. This comedic portrayal of Hermione's fear turns a potentially revealing moment into a caricature. It suggests that her only worry is academic performance. But this doesn't align with her arc across the series. This is a girl who wipes her parents' memories of her existence in Deathly Hallows, a girl who is tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange, held hostage, cut open with a knife. Yet we never get access to her inner world. There is no flashback to that horrific night at Malfoy Manor, no nightmare, no post-trauma, no confession of fear, just a stoic Hermione moving the plot forward. Even Harry, famously emotionally restrained, is allowed to break. In Order of the Phoenix, he screams at Dumbledore, smashes objects in rage, and spirals into grief. Ron suffers jealousy, insecurity, and loss. Neville, once timid and clumsy, gradually reveals a core of steel forged through years of quiet suffering. These characters are alive because they bleed, they cry, they tremble. Hermione, in contrast, becomes a plot device, offering knowledge, tactics, and logic, but no real humanity. We are never given her breaking point. There are moments that should have cracked her wide open. In Goblet of Fire, she is targeted by Rita Skeeter, mocked in the press, and threatened by fans of Viktor Krum and Harry. Yet she never appears rattled. She soldiers on, correcting homework and attending the Yule Ball. Even her activism for house elves is handled with intellectual outrage, not emotional turmoil. Compare this to Dobby, who trembles under Lucius Malfoy, or Kreacher, whose grief over Regulus is palpable. Hermione fights for their rights, but we don't see what personally motivates her. Is it guilt, compassion, rage? We never learn. In Half-Blood Prince, Hermione is devastated when Ron starts dating Lavender Brown, but even here, her pain is portrayed through sharp remarks and quiet sulking. There is no raw breakdown, no scene where she confesses her insecurities to Harry or anyone else. Ron, meanwhile, struggles with his identity in Harry's shadow and his family's poverty. Hermione is never allowed that space. She is emotionally muted, as if the narrative itself is afraid to let her be weak. When Bellatrix tortures Hermione in Deathly Hallows, it's a moment of unimaginable horror. Ron screams her name, their panic echoing through the manor. But once they escape, Hermione is fine. No shaking hands, no haunted eyes, no mention of scars, no scene where she avoids sleep because the screams replay in her dreams. Contrast this with Harry's lingering trauma from Cedric's death, Sirius's fall, or Dumbledore's demise. Hermione goes through the war like a ghost in armor, untouchable, impenetrable, unbreakable. And that's the problem. The decision to erase Hermione's vulnerability is more than a narrative oversight. It is a denial of her humanity. We see Draco Malfoy cry in the bathroom, shattering under pressure. We see Luna Lovegood grieve her mother, and even Hagrid weep for Aragog. But Hermione? She compartmentalizes everything, even when she obliviates her parents, the most emotionally brutal act in the entire series. It's brushed aside in one sentence. I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really Wendell and Monica Wilkins, she tells Harry and Ron. And then it's never mentioned again. This lack of emotional aftermath is not strength, it is emotional erasure. Imagine a different version of that story, Hermione alone in her childhood home, tears streaming down her face as she casts the memory charm, a moment of trembling, her wand hand shaking. But we don't get that. We get the machine, the girl who gets perfect marks, the girl who never cries. J.K. Rowling gives us plenty of tragedy to imagine, but she chooses not to explore it in Hermione's case. The war changes everyone. It hardens Harry, deepens Neville, fractures Ron, but Hermione remains strangely the same. She's just cleverer, quieter, always useful, always ready. It's as if her strength lies in her silence. But what a dangerous message that is. It says the smartest girl in the room doesn't get to feel, doesn't get to break, doesn't get to be held. The irony is Hermione is one of the most relatable characters. So many readers see themselves in her, ambitious, bookish, lonely, eager to prove themselves. But those readers deserve to see her struggle too, not just in battles but in breakdowns, in fear, in moments of doubt. They needed to know that even the brightest minds carry shadows. We never learn what keeps Hermione awake at night, what dreams haunt her, what memories she wishes she could erase. Her fears are defined externally: exams, social ridicule, losing control. But nothing pierces deeper, no mention of what it meant to grow up muggle-born in a world increasingly hostile to her kind, no moment where she confesses the terror of being hunted by Voldemort's followers. No reflection on watching her friends fall in battle. She is a witness to the war, but we are never shown what it does to her soul. In Order of the Phoenix, the formation of Dumbledore's army is one of Hermione's most courageous acts. She risks expulsion to teach her classmates defense against the dark arts, but even then, her motivations are explained through logic and planning, not fear, not righteous fury. We never get to see if she trembles when the inquisitorial squad comes near, when Umbridge tortures students, when Hogwarts becomes a prison. Her resistance is intellectual. She plays the role of rebel without ever appearing shaken. After the Battle of Hogwarts, we see Harry and Ron process the aftermath. Ron returns to his family. Harry visits Dumbledore's tomb. But Hermione, her story ends in silence. No monologue, no moment of reflection, no visit to the graves of fallen friends. She has no words for Fred or Tonks or Lupin. We don't even know if she returns to her parents. That journey, arguably the most poignant of all, is never shown. Perhaps the most heartbreaking absence is this: Hermione never gets to be comforted, not truly, not like Ginny in Order of the Phoenix, or Neville after his parents' torture is revealed. She is always the one offering comfort, patching wounds, solving problems. She is the rock everyone else leans on. But who catches her when she falls? The answer, tragically, is no one, because the narrative never lets her fall. This treatment is not only unfair, it's unrealistic. Hermione lives through years of conflict, betrayal, loss, and horror. No one survives that unscarred, and yet she is never granted a scene of solitude, reflection, or breakdown. No glimpse of a tear-streaked face, no moment where she questions if it's all worth it. We are left with an image of a girl whose fear begins and ends with exam failure. It is a cruel caricature. There was space, ample space, for this exploration. In Deathly Hallows, the trio wanders the countryside for months. We see Harry and Ron argue. Ron abandoned the group and Harry doubt Dumbledore. But Hermione remains steady. Too steady. Her silence becomes oppressive, her resilience unnatural. It makes her alien, not admirable. The missed opportunity is enormous. Hermione's inner world could have enriched the series. Imagine if we'd seen her fear that Harry would die, that Ron wouldn't return, that her parents would never remember her. These are real fears, human fears, the kinds of fears that stay with readers for life, but we got none of them. Instead, Hermione becomes the girl with all the answers, the girl who's always fine. And in a world as dark as Rowling's, that makes her feel less like a person and more like a tool, an encyclopedia with a wand. Her fears are treated as footnotes, her trauma erased. And so we are left to wonder, what did Hermione Granger fear when the lights went out? We will never know. And perhaps that is the most frightening thing of all. Number 22. Complete lack of exploration of her fears. Of all the peculiar choices made in the Harry Potter saga, none is more frustrating than the sudden silence of Hermione Granger in moments that scream for reason. She who memorized Hogwarts a history before stepping on the train, who brewed Polyjuice Potion at 12, who deciphered Snape's riddle when adults froze in panic, becomes curiously passive during crucial stages of the story. As the trio faces mortal danger when every brain cell counts, Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, stands in the background, offering neither plan nor analysis. It is not a matter of ability, it is a matter of the narrative inexplicably choosing not to use her mind. Take the escape from Malfoy Manor, one of the most terrifying and chaotic chapters in the Deathly Hallows. Torture echoes through the house. Bellatrix Lestrange carves into Hermione's skin. Harry, wandless and half-blind, is paralyzed with fear. Ron is panicking, desperate, ineffective. And yet, as they finally disapparate to the Forest of Dean, dazed and broken, Hermione, despite being the most logical, composed and battle-hardened of them all, does not lead. She does not assess the next steps, question where they are, or how they'll survive. She allows Harry to take command, even though he is shattered by visions from Voldemort's mind. The Hermione who once created contingency plans with color-coded schedules simply disappears from the decision-making table. And what of their hunt for Horcruxes, the most complex and dangerous mission in the entire war? Hermione is the one who reads the Tales of Beedle the Bard, who understands the magical theory behind Horcruxes better than anyone except Dumbledore, perhaps. She carries the beaded bag that contains an entire library. She's the one who insists they read Secrets of the Darkest Art. But as the journey progresses, it is Harry who determines their route, who senses when a Horcrux is near, who acts. Hermione follows. She listens. She reacts. But she does not think ahead, not the way she used to. The girl who once brewed antidotes on the fly, who set fire to Snape's robes for a distraction, seems subdued. In The Half-Blood Prince, Hermione is reduced to background noise while Harry, armed with little more than hunches and guesswork, follows Draco Malfoy around the castle. She argues once, maybe twice, but never takes initiative. She does not investigate Draco's behavior through logical deduction or try to track his movements using magic. This is the same Hermione who brewed a truth serum in third year, the same Hermione who mastered a time-turner, but instead of using spells or strategy, she sits in the Gryffindor common room waiting for Harry to return with scraps of information. Her voice, once sharp with insight, is quieted. The failure to use her mind is not only strange, it feels dishonest. The Hermione we knew in earlier books would never have allowed herself to become a spectator. Consider the Philosopher's Stone. It is she who solves the logic puzzle to get to the final chamber. "Me!" she cries. "Books and cleverness! There are more important things, friendship and bravery, and, oh, Harry, be careful." She acknowledges the value of emotion, yes, but never at the cost of abandoning intellect. And yet in the final book that balance tips too far. Logic and cleverness vanish when they are needed most. When the trio infiltrates the Ministry of Magic, Hermione does little strategizing beyond brewing Polyjuice Potion and assigning disguises. The plan is dangerously underdeveloped. Once inside, they flail. They run, shout, improvise. Mistakes abound. A logical mind would have foreseen the potential for magical detection, the risk of being split up, the need for escape routes. Hermione had months to prepare, but when the moment comes, she does not plan. The girl who once created detailed spew campaigns can't draft a proper ministry raid? Even more baffling is her passivity during their time in the forest. Days stretch into weeks as the trio camps without direction. They argue, they despair. Ron leaves. Hermione clutches the locket and cries. But she does not organize, investigate, or analyze. The bag holds thousands of pages of magical texts, but she doesn't create a reading schedule, doesn't assign research duties, doesn't lead magical experimentation. She does not cross-reference dark magic or map likely Horcrux locations based on Voldemort's psychology. She simply waits for Harry's visions, for fate to intervene. In the Goblet of Fire, Hermione's intellect had been razor-sharp. She was the only one who suspected Rita Skeeter's secrets. She deduced the animagus form. She blackmailed the journalist. This was proactive, risk-taking Hermione, outwitting adults and protecting friends. That version of her should have blossomed during the war. Instead, the war muffles her. It is as if her brilliance was too bright to share the stage, so the narrative dims it. The omission is not only frustrating, it is damaging. It reinforces the idea that even the smartest girls must step aside for the male hero. Harry is brave, yes, but he is reckless. Ron is loyal, but often clueless. Hermione is the mind. Without her guidance, the trio should collapse. But the plot twists itself to let Harry lead anyway. Even when Hermione has the facts, she hesitates. When they discuss the Hallows, Harry obsesses. Ron mocks. Hermione doubts, but she never investigates. She never asks the kinds of probing, uncomfortable questions that define her character. She simply resists, then resigns. "Are you actually as mad as he is?" she says in the Deathly Hallows when Harry insists on following the trail of the Hallows. But instead of breaking down the myth with historical research, instead of presenting her own counter-evidence, she simply disapproves. Her skepticism is emotional, not intellectual. This is not the Hermione we met in the library stacks, cross-referencing arithmancy and divination, calculating probabilities and magical theory. It is someone else entirely, someone whose instincts are not rooted in logic, but in narrative convenience. And what about her knowledge of ancient runes, an entire field of magic hinted to be crucial in understanding cursed artifacts, is left untouched? The locket, the cup, the diadem, all should have required translation, analysis, magical testing. But we are shown none of it. Hermione, fluent in ancient languages, uses her runic knowledge once to translate the Tales of Beedle the Bard, a children's book. In a war against dark sorcery, her academic specialty becomes a literary footnote. Even her most powerful spells, like the Protean charm used on the DA coins or the full-body bind she once cast on Neville, vanish from her arsenal. In battles, she fights bravely, but not ingeniously. She throws standard jinxes. She follows Harry. She reacts. She does not control the field. For someone who once bested a troll with a textbook, her spell work during the war is surprisingly generic. Where is the Hermione who could brew Wolfsbane potion in theory, who improved Gamp's law in her essays? In the final battle at Hogwarts, her intellect, once again, steps back. She runs, she curses, she shouts, but she does not lead. She does not organize the defense of the castle. She does not draw up strategic lines of protection or conjure magical shields based on architectural vulnerabilities. That role falls to others. McGonagall, Flitwick. Even Neville, in his rebellion leadership, shows more strategic creativity than Hermione in those scenes. The battlefield becomes a place for instinct, not for intellect. and she fades into the noise. This loss is most keenly felt when considering how different the war could have been had Hermione taken the reins of strategy. Imagine if she had mapped Voldemort's life against known magical sites, used psychological profiling to predict his hiding spots, created protective enchantments not just for their campsite, but for allies across the country. Imagine if her mind had been used as fully as her loyalty was. But the story needed Harry to lead, and so Hermione's genius was quietly set aside. Even emotionally, she is stripped of dimension. Her romance with Ron overshadows her other strengths. She becomes the love interest, the caretaker, the girl who cries at night. But where is the Hermione who debated magical ethics with professors, who founded social movements, who reshaped house elf politics with wit and fire? She is narrowed, simplified, reduced to someone who is merely present, but no longer essential. J.K. Rowling herself once described Hermione as the brightest witch of her age, and yet in the decisive moments her brightness dims, not through trauma or character development, but through neglect. The narrative forgets her mind, and so we forget the fire in her questions, the precision in her analysis, the stubbornness in her logic. She becomes less a character, more a companion, there to support, not to shine. In the end, when Voldemort falls and silence returns to Hogwarts, Hermione's arc is left without a proper crescendo. We are told she returns to the Ministry, that she champions change, that she reforms laws. But we are not shown this. Her intellect, so essential to the early books, is robbed of its rightful climax. Her mind, once the key to survival, becomes a relic of peacetime. She is no longer a force on the battlefield, just a memory of brilliance, dimmed when it was most needed. Number 23, inexplicable refusal to use her intelligence in crucial moments. Hermione Granger was never just a sidekick. From the moment she entered the story, she stood apart as someone driven by ideals, intellect, and an unwavering sense of justice. She wasn't born into the magical world, yet she worked harder than anyone to understand it, to master it, and eventually to challenge its deepest injustices. Her work with SPW, her defiance of pureblood supremacy, her constant insistence on fairness, all these moments set the stage for something greater. But when the time came, when the Ministry of Magic fell under the control of Voldemort's puppet regime and the full weight of systemic oppression bore down on people like her, Muggle-borns, Hermione, inexplicably, became quiet. The fire that had once burned so fiercely dimmed into quiet pragmatism. And a powerful, necessary storyline was lost. The 7th book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, plunges the wizarding world into a state of fear and fascism. The Ministry is no longer the inept bureaucratic machine we had known. It becomes a weapon. Under the guise of law and order, it begins hunting Muggle-borns. A new registry is established, a Muggle-born registration commission. Trials are held, show trials where people are accused of stealing magic. They are dragged before Dolores Umbridge and other collaborators, humiliated and imprisoned. Some disappear, others are tortured. These are Hermione's people. This is the world turning against her identity, and yet she does not rage. We are told that Hermione alters her parents' memories to protect them. She makes the hard choice of erasing herself from their lives to keep them safe from the regime. This is an act of immense sacrifice, and we feel its weight. But then her response to the broader political crisis becomes diluted. She joins Harry and Ron on their quest for Horcruxes, or a noble, crucial mission, but her role becomes functional rather than ideological. She carries the books, the beaded bag, the spells. She supports, she acts. But she does not lead, she does not organize, she does not resist in the way we had come to expect from her. The Ministry's betrayal should have been a central emotional thread for Hermione. We had seen her care deeply about house elves, about half-giants, about centaurs, about any injustice, even those not her own. So how is it that when her own blood is criminalized, when her identity is reduced to a crime, she becomes almost passive? There is no scene where she breaks down in fury, no moment where she confronts the grotesque transformation of her society, no inner conflict, no crisis of trust in the institutions she once tried to work within. There is only efficiency. Consider the moment when they infiltrate the ministry. Hermione disguises herself as Mafalda Hopkirk and witnesses the horror firsthand. Mary Cattermole, a muggle-born witch, is on trial for her very existence. Hermione watches as Umbridge mocks her, as Dementors circle the courtroom, as fear crushes the air. And yet, the text does not linger on Hermione's reaction. There is no visceral reflection, no reference to her imagining herself in Mary's place, no trembling hand, no silent scream. She executes the plan with precision and then leaves. The story misses an enormous opportunity to deepen her arc, to explore her fear and her fury. Hermione had always been more than just clever. She was passionate about change. She challenged authority even as a first year, questioning Snape's cruelty, standing up to McGonagall. She wasn't afraid to be unpopular. In Goblet of Fire, she endured ridicule and social ostracism for founding SPW. Her compassion didn't need to be fashionable. It was deeply rooted in her sense of justice. So why, when her entire people were hunted like criminals, did she fall silent? Why didn't she speak for them, lead for them, cry for them? Even the scene with Xenophilius Lovegood, when the trio confronts the disturbing reality that not all resistance is principled, offers no moment of personal reflection from Hermione. Xenophilius betrayed them to save Luna. Hermione, who knows the agony of loss and sacrifice, should have connected this to her own fears, her erased parents, the possible death of every muggle-born friend she had. Instead, she only scolds him. No introspection, no moral reckoning. It was a missed moment, a missed echo of her own grief. When they're on the run, moving from forest to forest, from ruin to ruin, Hermione reads the tales of Beedle the Bard. She pieces together the puzzle of the Deathly Hallows. She discusses wand lore and wizarding legends. But where is her inquiry into the muggle-born disappearances? Where is her anguish over the growing propaganda, the twisted broadcasts of the Daily Prophet? She, who once obsessed over the injustice of centaur classification, shows almost no visible emotional breakdown at the totalitarian collapse of the world she worked so hard to be a part of. Even the wireless broadcasts of Potterwatch, where Lee Jordan and others speak truth to power, are met with muted response from her. She listens, nods, absorbs, but she does not seek to join them, to rally others, to create a network of fellow muggle-borns in hiding. Hermione is a strategist. She is capable of building an entire social movement. The text has shown this. And yet she never tries. She chooses instead to remain in Harry's orbit, a helper, not a voice. The case of Dirk Cresswell stands as a painful reminder. A muggle-born working at the ministry, he is captured and later murdered while on the run. His story is told as a footnote, an afterthought. And from Hermione, silence. No grief. No fury. No declaration of vengeance or resolve. It's as if the death of someone who could have been her colleague, her friend, barely registers. The Hermione we met in earlier books would have written letters, led protests, chained herself to ministry gates. Now she packs the tent and moves on. Some readers argue that Hermione's silence was a survival tactic, that she couldn't afford to fall apart, that her quiet resolve was strength. But this argument does not hold when set against her previous behavior. She never feared confrontation. She faced down Rita Skeeter, broke laws to help Buckbeak, and created a student army within a school governed by a tyrant. Her activism was bold, not cautious. To see her become emotionally flat during the darkest time for her people is not realism. It is narrative neglect. Dolores Umbridge's presence in the ministry should have been personal for Hermione. She had been physically and psychologically tortured by this woman. And now Umbridge holds trials for muggle-borns, wearing their wands around her neck like trophies. There is no greater symbol of perverse authority. Yet even in the face of this, Hermione never expresses personal hatred or horror. She helps take the locket from Umbridge, and that's it. The story never gives her the room to respond as a victim, as a rebel, as a symbol. There is a scene where the trio is captured and taken to Malfoy Manor. Bellatrix Lestrange tortures Hermione, carves into her skin. The moment is horrific, and it hints at the violence Muggleborns are subjected to. But the aftermath is curiously void. We see physical scars, but not emotional ones. Hermione never speaks of it again. There is no trauma, no nightmare, no vow of resistance. Her pain becomes a narrative device to motivate the others. Her suffering is borrowed, not owned. In the final battle, Hermione fights bravely. She duels Bellatrix, she helps destroy a Horcrux, she saves lives. But still the focus remains on the war against Voldemort as a person, not the war against his ideology. There is no reckoning for the Ministry, no rebuilding, no suggestion that she will lead reform. She walks away from Hogwarts into the future, and the reader is left to imagine what she might have done for Muggleborn rights. The story never tells us, and that silence is deafening. Hermione could have been so much more. She could have become the face of a new magical civil rights movement. She could have written books, founded organizations, stood in the ruins of the Ministry and declared, "Never again." But instead she disappears into the background of the epilogue, married, successful, vague. We do not hear her voice. We do not see her rise. This wasn't just a missed character arc, it was a missed cultural moment. The parallels between the treatment of Muggleborns and historical systems of racial, ethnic, and political persecution were clear. The books flirted with allegory, but they never committed, and Hermione, who could have been the lens through which to explore these ideas, was denied that role. When Harry stands before Voldemort in the forest, he becomes a Christ-like figure of sacrifice. When Neville kills Nagini, he becomes the surprise hero. But Hermione, who had more personal reason than anyone to hate the system Voldemort built, never gets her moment of confrontation. She never speaks to power. She never says, "This is for everyone you hurt." The emotional climax of her storyline never arrives. Perhaps the most heartbreaking example is the lack of solidarity shown between Hermione and other Muggleborns. She never seeks them out, never finds Dean Thomas, never tracks the stories of those hiding or imprisoned. The girl who once devoured the library is not seen researching the laws that condemned her kind. Her war is quiet, abstract, not human. In the end, Hermione Granger remains beloved, and deservedly so, but the tragedy lies not in what she became, but in what she was never allowed to be. The books gave her brilliance, bravery, loyalty, but they withheld from her the rage she earned, the leadership she deserved, and the voice she would have raised. Her silence in the face of betrayal was not a choice. It was an omission, and the story is poorer for it. Number 24. No reaction to the betrayal by the Ministry of Magic. Of all the characters that populate the magical world of Harry Potter, none is more carefully sculpted into perfection than Hermione Granger. She is the brightest witch of her age, a champion of moral causes, a loyal friend, a fierce fighter, and the voice of reason in the trio that includes the boy who lived and his ever-loyal companion, Ron Weasley. From her very first appearance on the Hogwarts Express, her intelligence, composure, and certainty set her apart. Yet beneath the sheen of brilliance and bravery lies a fundamental problem. Hermione Granger's story is marred by the burden of flawlessness. While Harry is shaped by trauma and recklessness, and Ron by insecurity and jealousy, Hermione sails through the narrative with barely a blemish. This sterilization of her humanity renders her curiously hollow, an emblem rather than a living, breathing girl. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, we meet a girl who is bossy, overprepared, and somewhat socially tone-deaf. She corrects Ron's spellcasting with smug confidence and shows off her knowledge of Hogwarts history. "It's Leviosa, not Leviosa," she famously says, already positioning herself as the ultimate authority on all things magical. But this early portrayal is never allowed to blossom into a nuanced character flaw. Her arrogance is quickly forgiven when she cries in the bathroom, then saved from a troll. The emotional payoff is immediate, and the tension disappears. Unlike Ron, whose jealousy builds and simmers before exploding in Goblet of Fire, or Harry, whose anger and self-doubt deepen in Order of the Phoenix, Hermione's growth is accelerated and her imperfections are instantly neutralized. When Hermione takes drastic action like conjuring enchanted fires or illegally brewing Polyjuice Potion, it is framed as necessary and noble. Her breaking of the rules is strategic, calculated, and ultimately justified by the plot. Even her most ethically grey decision, placing a Jinx on the list of Dumbledore's army members in Order of the Phoenix, is presented not as a sign of her control-freak tendencies or thirst for power, but as a clever precaution. The book notes, "You might have told us about that, Jinx," said Ron. "All those people's pimples." Hermione simply shrugs it off. There is no deeper interrogation, no moment of self-doubt or regret. The act is tidied away in the ever-growing file of "Hermione was right all along."